I'd say that one of the main principles of safety wear is that you're safe without having to think about it. You've got a hangover, your relationship's breaking down, the mobile phone's just rang. It doesn't matter if your mind's just not on it, you're still safe because you're wearing the right things. Plumbing and a lot of other construction work too, what you've got to be aware of is long-term damage. If you have a cut on your finger or something like that, you can see what's happened and you can deal with it straight away, put a plaster on or whatever. But a lot of things in plumbing where you've got long-term damage which you don't see immediately. Kneeling down is a classic, kneeling on the hard floors. A lot of plumbers have done something to the knees, but it's only later on that they've got problems, and it spoils their retirement. Now, my college lecturers were a bunch of cripples. One guy ruined his shoulder by going up ladders onto the roof with a roll of lead in his shoulder. This goes back to the days when plumbers did lead work. Another guy had a hernia. And another guy, when he wanted to look at practical work on the bench, he had to hold on to the side of the bench and lower himself down to the floor to his knees to have a closer look, because he shot his knees to bits. These guys were lucky that they got jobs as lecturers once they had to leave plumbing. But for the rest of us, well, certainly it's been a warning to me to make sure that I've got the right safety things with me and not take chances. In this video I'm going to be looking at the whole range of things that you can consider, starting with your head. First, starting at the head and eyes, I keep my safety specs in one of the soft pouches that new taps come in to keep them scratch free. Now, I don't actually use mine very much, perhaps for angle grinding cast iron soil pipes or smashing up to cast iron bars. There are a lot of instructional videos around where people doing any practical plumbing work automatically put on their safety specs, and I'm not sure if this is a good thing. As soon as you break the link between wearing safety wear and understanding why you wear safety wear, then that's the start of complacency. And one day you'll be up in the loft, you've left your stuff at the bottom of the ladder, and you take a chance. But if you think to yourself, if I don't wear this, that may happen, that'll give you the energy to get down that ladder and get your stuff. There's a video by one of the top tiling companies in the UK. They should know better, but they show a guy and a lady removing grout between tiles in the shower. And of course with these videos the lady does the job, and she puts her safety specs on and gets her tool to gently scrape the grout out of the cracks between the tiles. Now, she's doing a task that in a kitchen she wouldn't even think about putting safety specs on. Frying eggs, you name it, even professional chefs wouldn't put safety specs on. But she has to wear her specs. Now, to me this is a silly video because it ignores a real problem, a safety problem here. It's not the eyes at all, it's her nose. Why? Anyone who's done this job in a side light, the sun shining through, perhaps into the shower, will see clouds of grout powder in the air before it settles. And that's where the danger is. You've got to protect your nose against breathing this stuff. And that is the more important safety wear that's just ignored by this particular video. There are two kinds of dust mask, one with an elastic band to pull the mask onto your face. I've covered mine with material because the rubber catches my hair. And there's the half mask which looks like this, and there's a metal strip at the top to mould around your nose, and you've got to make sure that there's a good fit around your mouth. Now, to show you how important that is, if you're removing asbestos, for instance, and you'll be wearing a proper mask, of course, operators are recommended to have a shave during the day to get rid of any stubble, to make sure that a very, very good seal around the face. And incidentally, that will mean if you've got stubble or even a beard, you'll find it difficult to have a good seal with one of these. There are standards for face masks. You'll see the coding P1, P2, P3, or FFP1, FFP2, FFP3, and they relate to the amount of dust and particulates in the air that they'll catch 80%, 94% and 99%, so the P3s are the best. If you're working in a loft and laying loft insulation, it's a P1 or FFP1 that you'd be recommended to wear. This is a P-type mask, which is a mask with an incorporated filter, and this is an FFP type, which is the mask is all filter material, and on the side you see printed here FFP1. If you're doing a plumbing job in the loft and you're not really handling the insulation, perhaps moving some aside to make way for pipe work and so on, it's really quite okay to use something called a comfort mask. They're a bit like these ones, but they're disposable, they're much cheaper. These are perhaps £1 each. The comfort masks are 8–10p each, and you're much more likely to use them for this kind of job if you're just going into a loft. Even for a longish job, you want to keep one of these on all the time. I wouldn't go into a loft and do any work without one of these. When I do a really dusty job like taking out an old bathroom, I always wear this one. But if you're going to have this type, I just think you definitely want an FFP1 or better to make sure you don't breathe any of the dust. A lot of the building dust is very, very fine. It'll hang around in the air for a long time before it settles, and you can quite easily breathe that in. As I'm dealing with safety, I'll say something about my mouth. I make it an absolute rule when I'm on a job not to touch my mouth with my fingers. People travel the world these days and could be bringing back bugs that you haven't encountered, and if you pick up something in their bathroom, you may go down with something. There are basically two kinds of ear protectors. The first is muffs, which fit over your ear, and ear plugs, which you insert into your ear canal. Now, these are perhaps the easiest to use. You just pop them in your toolkit, you just stick them on your ears, you can take them off when you want to have a break, and so on. Earplugs in this kind, which are held in place by the plastic spring, you perhaps wear underneath your chin or over the top of your head. These can be fine, but they get dirty very easily. Especially for me, I get waxy ears, and these don't come out clean, and they will need washing or throwing out. If you're going to use earplugs, you're better getting disposable plugs, and they're not very expensive. And they also allow you to talk as well as blocking off the sort of loud and high-pitched sounds that you want to protect yourself from. If you do much work in lofts, you might consider a cap with reinforcement in case you bump your head against the trusses. I remember a plumber saying to me that people with hair on their heads get that split-second warning when the hair brushes against something you're about to hit, which people like me don't have. And I don't do much work in lofts, but if I did, I'd certainly get one of these. Hands. I always carry a bag of plasters with me in case I have cuts or blisters. If you're not going to wear any gloves over your hand, you could consider a barrier cream. Spread this over at the beginning of a dirty job, and it'll make the dirt easier to wash off afterwards. It'll also help to protect your hands. If you wash your hands too much, or when I wash my hands, I get cracks at just around my fingernails, and it can be incredibly painful and take a few days to heal. Here's a new kind of skin protector for your hands called No More Gloves. It's a liquid. You just squeeze some into your hand and spread it all over until it's dry, and keeps the grease and a lot of dirt off. But at the end of the job, you wash it off, and that means that if your plumbing work is wet at all, it's not going to be very effective. It's really, I mean, it says on the bottom, the small print, dry work, but it might be useful for some kinds of plumbing jobs. CK Tools say they developed a dextro range of screwdrivers in response to plumbers and other tradesmen who get what's called trigger finger. Now, this is what you get apparently if you're holding a screwdriver in your hand for long periods, and the tendons in your fingers swell up. Now, the tendons, when you move your finger, apparently move in and out of a tube. If the tendon swells, instead of just sliding in and out of this tube, the swelling catches on the top, and all of a sudden, when you try and bend your finger, it flicks in to the tube. So that flick is called the trigger finger. I've never had any trouble with screwdriving. I don't do it often enough to cause me a problem, but it may be that if you're on a building site and you've got a lot of repetitive actions, then this is something to consider. It's a form of repetitive strain injury where you do a similar action over and over again. In this case, it may start at cramps, and at the end of a day on site, you may really feel something in your fingers, and if it gets worse and turns into trigger finger, you could be off work for weeks. Gloves, there are leather gloves, of course, essential for heavier work where you might get splinters or nails catching on. There are a range of rubber type gloves, from very thin latex ones like this to much thicker rubber gloves for working with tiles and that sort of thing. These thinner ones can mold to your fingers much more easily and retain the sensitivity of your feeling, but they're more likely to catch on edges and split. These disposable ones are perhaps 5p if you buy a box full. You can also get acrylic ones, but they're a bit harder. You might not be able to wear latex if it gives you a reaction to your skin. They're a bit harder and not so close fitting. And I've got these ones, which are a bit heavier duty than these, and that's quite useful to have sometimes. And also I've got one of these arm length rubber gloves, which is absolutely essential for work with sewage systems. Finally, joints in your fingers. Joints are parts of the body that take a long time to heal if they're ever damaged. So if you're ever doing heavy work which could do with the protection of leather gloves, put them on, because if you hurt your joints, you could be out of action for a long time. And that goes for the joints in your spine too. I'm thinking particularly of your lower back. You will have heard of active lifting, where you keep a straight back when you're lifting jobs and get up and down, keeping your back straight. Don't stoop, because that's when, if your weight is really heavy, you are heading perhaps for a slip disc and a long time off work. And if you are lifting heavy weights, watch out for your stomach muscles too. I was working with a guy who had a hernia and weak abdominal muscles, and he had a leather boxing belt tight round his front whenever he lifted boilers. A lot of plumbers complain about their knees, and that's because they need to be kneeling down on hard floors without any protection. When I work with my work trousers on, I have my knee protection with me all the time, because the knee pads fit into the knee pockets at the front. In summertime, where I'm wearing shorts, I find the gardening knee pads quite sufficient, but they do crush quite easily. They don't last that long. What I do is take worn pads from my work trousers. They get crushed at the top, but they last much longer and don't crush so easily. And I use the elastic from the gardening pads. I just thread them through there. These are my summer work pads. You can get heavier pads to wear, gel pads, that kind of thing, but I find them a bit uncomfortable to wear. They aren't necessarily heavy. They're perhaps more suitable for on the floor tiling work or that sort of thing. And also the ones with two straps at the back, I find very uncomfortable at the back of my leg. So these single strap ones is what I prefer, and lightweight if possible. I've just started trying a British made and designed knee pad called the Redback. This is one, if I take off this part, which is a cushion which fits around, and that's a knee cushion. Underneath you can see the honeycomb construction of the knee pad with a bit of support in the middle. But because the honeycombs are at right angles to your knees, I think maybe if you drop down on your knees, you can get a bit of a hard landing so you have to just be a bit careful there. But once you're there, this has got a lateral side-to-side flexibility, which I think looks very promising, and I'm sure these will outlast the ordinary foam pads, which will crush fairly soon. Since I filmed that a couple of years ago, I've been using redbacks all the time, and there's absolutely no wear at all. I found them very comfortable to use. I would say that this cover though, I've frayed all over the place, so I had to run up a zigzag on either side of my sewing machine, but otherwise I'm certainly happy with these. One new kind of knee pad on the market made by Snickers to do this spongy time, and I certainly don't like these anymore, but these ones, the orange patch hardens on impact. This orange bit is filled with a material called D30, developed by the Army recently. It's a soft goo which stiffens on impact, and they're using it already in helmets to soften the impact of blows, which instead of being transmitted to the brain, stiffens on impact. And they're looking at other applications too, for Army uniform, and also it's being used for applications like this. The point about D30, of course, is that it's soft and comfortable to wear most of the time, but when you need it, it'll stiffen and protect you. And when you're getting up, it's a good idea to learn how to get up without resting your weight on the nearest object, like a table or basin, because that's when you find they're not securely fixed and something awful happens. And finally, feet. Again, it's mostly a question of protecting the joints of your toes, and for this you must have reinforced toe caps. Here you can see the metal shining through because I've worn through the leather here. You can also get shoes with reinforced soles. This has got a little bit of reinforcement, but when I had large plate before, I got a crack at the bottom of the plate. So unless you need sole reinforcement, you perhaps don't need to get these. I have seen an old sort of safety film long ago where a guy jumped out of the van into a puddle, and there was a plank of wood with a nail sticking out, and that went through his foot. And that's the sort of thing that you would want sole plate for. These ones, incidentally, have got Velcro on, which is incredibly useful, really. I've got quite a few customers who've got cream-coloured carpets and that kind of thing throughout the house, and I step in the door and they say, "Will you mind taking your boots off?" Well, I really don't like taking my boots off when I'm working, but I've got to take my boots off when I first go there to have a look at the job, and it's handier than undoing shoelaces and so on. Of course, later, once I do the job, I'll keep my boots on, but I just cover my walkway with the dust sheets.